AA. 79 The reality of sports in today's world. In every society there is a need to make substantial changes, if required, or subtle modifications to improve the economic or political structure of a country. Here are also included new trends and collective and individual rights, which must be respected and adapted to each situation. In the case of sports this is extremely important, so in this essay I will seek to analyze its reality and the problems it is going through. To better understand the reality of sports in today's world, it is convenient to speak of one of the most popular in most countries. Football, also known as the king's sport, has left behind its concept as a mere sport discipline, becoming a business that moves millions of dollars. Players sign contracts to be the representatives of different products, often affecting their performance to avoid hurting their bodies, which happens to become a resource of incredible value for large companies. The same happens with television rights, which end up creating an all-out war between the most important networks. On the other hand are the secret clauses that are stipulated in many transfers, as well as the colossal debts that are created. All this has as consequence a dubious ethical environment, where the behavior of innumerable professional soccer players becomes the example to follow of children and young people. However, this reality can not only be seen in football, but there are cases in other sports. Such is the case of cycling, where you can find scandals that reveal a high consumption of illegal substances to improve the performance of those involved. One of the most famous is that of Lance Armstrong, who received great media attention for the different awards he had received. Although there is no doubt that these problems result in more demanding doping tests, it is also true that they become part of an unnecessary show that the public consumes obsessively. In this way, many sports lose their essence as a discipline, and they become the products of a corrupt system. In conclusion, it is inevitable that the most popular sports end up becoming tradable goods, given the large volume of profits that is involved in their practice and promotion. However, it is necessary for people to be clear about this reality, not taking it as the example to follow and seeking to progressively improve over the years. AAA. 80 Analyzing the passion for soccer in the country of Argentina. When people talk about soccer in South America, two countries, Brazil and Argentina, always stand out. Either because of the contributions they have given to the sport or because of the soccer culture that characterizes their nations. In the case of Argentina, it is part of its tradition and is practiced by men and women of all ages, both recreationally and professionally. It is the most popular sport and it has become a passion for its people, which deserves to be analyzed to understand it better. The origins of football in Argentina can be recorded around the middle of the 19th century, when English immigrants began to settle in their territory. However, the first game of this sport was held on June 20, 1867, the place chosen was the Buenos Aires Cricket Club. It is worth mentioning that only 4 years had passed since the creation of the official regulations by the Football Association, a fact that took place in England. Several years later it was still played in clubs and institutions of English origin, either by people of that nationality or who maintained some kind of relationship with it. However, it would take almost 2 decades until the first school was created where students could practice football freely, being founded by Isaac Newell. This helped to popularize the sport and became an intrinsic part of childhood and youth in Argentina. Currently, Argentine football clubs are the ones with the highest number of international awards, with more than 68 awards to their credit. Among the most important are those achieved in the Intercontinental Cup and those won in the Copa Libertadores de America. They also have a long history of individual talents that have played on the most important teams in different countries. An example of them is Lionel Messi, who is usually considered the best player in this sport worldwide. Being the only one to have obtained 5 times the FIFA Golden Ball, 4 of them were consecutive. The passion for football in Argentina has manifested itself in different media, becoming an inevitable part of their culture. Figures like Maradona are exalted all over the world, and they are always remembered for their talent that is automatically related to the country. Football appears in its traditional music, tango, found in songs that talk about its most emblematic clubs. In addition, in past decades he was also present in many pieces of his literature, and even in the cinema. CAA 81 Human Development and its Effect on Nature. Unlike in past centuries, there is currently an alarming imbalance between human development and the stability of nature. The advance of civilization in its different aspects has improved the lives of countless people, of that there is no doubt, but many experts believe that it has occurred in an accelerated way, without thinking about future generations. This reality makes it necessary to analyze the different problems facing the planet, especially those that are an effect of human development. Hoy en día, todos tenemos la obligación de mantenernos informados sobre los desafíos que existen para mantener y mejorar el estado del medio ambiente, con el objetivo de proponer estrategias y planes para alcanzar un desarrollo sostenible. No obstante, es paradójico que esta responsabilidad muchas veces se dejada de lado por las empresas y los gobiernos de cada país, cuando son ellos los principales culpables del deterioro ambiental. In this way, it is very important to establish global agreements to mitigate the damage that nature constantly affects. Not only must they talk about the sustainability of renewable and non-renewable resources, but at the same time, and with the help of men and women of science, they must demonstrate a latent concern that is suitably structured for their viability. While compliance has to be monitored by the population and specialized institutions, revealing the need for their progress and objectives to be public knowledge and easy to access. In Latin America, for example, problems can be found related to the biogeochemical cycle of phosphorus, which results in the poisoning of the lands that are used for cultivation. This is extremely worrying, given that in that part of the world is where the largest agricultural reserves are located. In spite of this, the fertilization methods that are employed conflict with the environment, and nature suffers its effects. On the other hand, countries like Uruguay take into account the climatic phenomena associated with the Pacific Ocean. One of them is known as El Niño, which is capable of negatively impacting the lives of many people. Its consequences include fishing losses, droughts, and alluvial generation, which is linked to the low atmospheric pressure that is produced. Taking all this into account, it is essential to incorporate research departments in each country. However, not only do they have to study the present and how to mitigate the damage produced, but they must be able to prevent the possible effects of human development on nature. Only in this way can a sustainable balance be established between man and the environment. CCAA 82 Rock music and its cultural impact. Rock can be considered among the musical genres that, since its appearance, have generated a great cultural impact. Its influence is perceived in multiple generations, in which, depending on the country where it was developed, an adaptation was carried out that was oriented to the preferences of each era. Although rock music can be classified into several subgenres that were conceived over the decades, it is essential to go back to the 40s to understand its beginnings and how its influence was established, initially in the United States and then around the world. The song Good Rocking Tonight that was released in the year 1947 has a great relevance in this aspect. It is a parody of gospel music, the genre of African American ceremonies, and was the first to use the term rock away from religious implications. It is worth mentioning that this era was characterized by racism and discrimination. In this way, in 1951 the genre had already become popular on radios, positioning itself as something that was novel for most people. Helping to change the prejudice and intolerance perceived by those years in the United States. The introduction into their culture was possible thanks to the audience that became bigger and more diverse with the passage of time. On the other hand, in England the cultural impact of rock music was already beginning to be felt. During the 50s, a subculture appeared that was called the Teddy Boys. It was characterized by young people who dressed like the dandies who lived at the beginning of the 20th century. This fact is extremely important, because it represents the first time that in this country a group of young people sought to differentiate themselves from the rest. The international reach of rock music has made it one of the main sources to influence styles and trends. The exponents transmit their ideals, perspectives on the world, social or political ideologies and the feelings they experience. Then, each song becomes the reflection of an era and ends up affecting society in one way or another. Since its birth until today, rock music has allowed young people to have access to a way of defining their identity. Likewise, its impact on society is incalculable. Since, as we have seen, it is not limited to songs and artists. But it is capable of changing mentalities, redefining fashion, and through its letters communicate the desires and convictions that are often left out by the system. A. 83 Chronic poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean. The economic crisis that some European countries went through at the end of the last decade was the consequence of serious problems in the financial, real estate and production areas. In Spain, for example, it was a situation comparable to the years following the Second World War, with a very high number of unemployed people, and a government that was not in a position to combat these problems. However, according to a recent World Bank report, several countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are still immersed in an alarming reality, with a high level of poverty in rural areas. In recent years, all kinds of international studies have been carried out to analyze chronic poverty and its effects. Apart from statistical variables, there is no doubt that their biggest problem is the hopelessness that it causes in the affected people, who are forced to subsist on it. This component has an intergenerational transmission capacity, increasing in intensity according to the difficulties and impediments that arise in the field of health and education. Children who grow up in this context, where there is a lack of material and emotional resources, find it difficult to prosper in the future. Their families face all kinds of limitations and obstacles, being deprived of their basic rights and interfering with their physical and intellectual development. The causes of poverty at the individual level are related to the aptitudes and opportunities that a particular individual has to guarantee their basic needs. With this in mind, governments should promote the implementation of decent jobs with adequate remuneration, so that people affected by poverty can cover aspects such as food, shelter, education, and health. On the other hand, when we talk about poverty as a generalized problem within a country, there are much more complex variables. New technologies and their implementation in society are an essential part in this aspect, since they favor the production of articles of consumption and daily use in a faster and more efficient way. Here also are the scientific advances in the field of medicine, which allow to offer a better quality of life to less favored groups, either through the development of vitamins or nutritional alternatives. It is important that in Latin America and the Caribbean efforts and resources be devoted to combating inequality, beyond interpreting figures on the levels of poverty and concentrating on the public debate about it. Economic growth must be accompanied by policies focused on social justice, where all people can access basic needs and have the opportunity to move forward.